Hello and welcome to Shaka Extra Time. I am Paul Ndiho, and joining me on set live is Shaka Sali himself, aka the Kabale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Paul.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
How are you?
Hugely terrific.
Great, great. A warm welcome to you all our Facebook followers are watching us live. Shaka Extra Time is a place where you get to talk to Shaka. Shaka today will be taking your questions on a wide range of issues, but before we go there, let's start right here at home. So Shaka, something remarkable is happening in the United States in terms of immigration. Policies are changing. A lot of people who are coming, who have had the privilege of crossing the United States through the southern border, are being told, no, things have changed. It's no longer business as usual. What do you make of that?
You know, it is a very, very interesting issue. There's no question about it. And you saw how, for example, it played out during the midterms. It frankly didn't seem to be pretty much on the political radar in terms of the midterms, because you realize that the issue really that appealed to a lot of people, and that's the reason why they voted for the Democrats, especially for the House of Representatives, was the issue called health care. Health care and the jobs, really, and the paycheck and stuff like that. But nonetheless, the issue of immigration is very, very important, especially to the Chief Executive Officer of the United States of America. And I'm talking about the man who heads the executive branch, the President Donald Trump. His issue is immigration, immigration, immigration. Just like when you talk about a very good house and what have you, you always hear people saying location, location, location.
Interesting. Let's look at it maybe from the historical perspective, since we are focusing on Africa. Between 1884 and 1885, the Europeans, at the time the European colonizers, when they're going to partition Africa, they decided to have a meeting of sorts, and they invited themselves to this meeting that was, I guess, led by Chancellor Bismarck, Prince Bismarck at the time, to partition Africa. Not a single African was invited to attend that. When you think about it, back then, all these Europeans went to Africa without invitation or without visas. So put it in context in line with what's happening in America, considering that most Americans here are immigrated from Europe.
It's a very interesting point, and of course it is a very emotional and emotive issue when you think about it. When you look at the history of the United States of America, you're talking about, for example, the issue of the Mayflower, the boat that carried the initial European immigrants, basically. You're talking about the pilgrims and all that kind of stuff. The last time I checked, you are right, they didn't seem to have anything to do with or similar or something that one would probably refer to or call or describe as a visa. They were still able to make it this way. And as a matter of fact, we recently got out of what is called Thanksgiving. And the reason the Thanksgiving is very important is because it is a time or a period when the indigenous people, the indigenous American people, and the new immigrants made peace to be able to coexist, to live together. Because let's face it, the United States is a huge, huge country. You're talking about from the East Coast to the West Coast. You're talking about in the neighborhood of 3,000 miles. And you know, the audience should be aware, for example, that you and I are operating from Washington, D.C., which is on the East Coast, and that it is actually 3 hours ahead of the West Coast. We're talking about California. Our brothers and sisters who are in California, who are in Washington, Seattle, who are in Oregon, those types of countries, they happen to be 3 hours behind us. And we are still in the same beautiful country called the United States of America. So yes, this is a country, for example, for centuries, sincerely, that appealed to the rest of the world because it was basically looked at as the home of almost everybody, really. It had such a huge heart, welcoming people who were in need of running away from political, for example, political persecution, running away from countries where there was no religious freedom. In the sense, looking for not only a greener pasture, but in fact, running away to come to America, and they were sure that once they hit the land of America, they would be free at last. This is America, where people came poor, people came without education, including myself and stuff like that, and you had the opportunity to go to school, to go to college and get yourself a degree, get skills and stuff like that, that would market you and give you an opportunity to make contributions to Americans and beyond. When you look at a guy like you, a guy like me, we are reflections of what I'm talking about. When you're looking at the President of the United States himself, Donald Trump, his parents were actually came from here. They came from Europe. When you look at his wife, she also came from Europe. So it's very, very ironic sometimes that the issue of immigration has really become very hot. Yes, I think one could make a very legitimate, point that definitely this country needs to be in a position where it is in control of its borders. It is in control of its borders in the sense that all people who come here should come here legally, so that you can protect Americans from the issue of job competition and what have you. Yes, that is legitimate, but again, this is a country almost unlike any other country that you can think of in modern times, sincerely, which has had a huge heart, and I hope that this is not the end.
What do you make of people, for example, asylees who are trying to come to this country? Earlier you talked about how we've been privileged to benefit from some of the opportunities here in this country. There are a lot of people who look up to us and they say, I want to go to America, but how am I going to do it? As we speak, asylees, people who are seeking asylum here, are not allowed. What would you say to those young people out there who are looking up to you and they want to maybe eventually make it up to here?
No, the Trump administration has not said, or nor has it in fact a policy of saying that you cannot come to America if you use the legal channels. I can only say that those who are hoping to come to America for one reason or the other, they should be able to use legal channels by, for example, approaching the nearest embassy or the nearest consulate, fill forms and go through the system as it were. But if you think that you can walk your way through, through the back channels and stuff like that, that may not really be easy anymore, because this administration is really very much focused on making sure that it secures its borders and has all the tools, including security forces and what have you. In fact, they have even, I think it has reached a point where they're even trying to use some elements of the armed forces outside of the border, certainly because the U.S. armed forces are not supposed to be in the business of policing, really, police and all that kind of stuff. But I think that, people should know that if they take the legal route, the legal channels and what have you, they still have a chance. They still have an opportunity to come to America and realize their dreams, whatever dreams they have.
Let's cross over to Nigeria. Campaigns, political campaigns for general elections in February are underway. Two prominent candidates are on the ballot. There are several other candidates on the ballot, but the two stand out. That is President Muhammadu Buhari and former Vice President Atiku Abubakar. What's at stake, Shaka, in these elections?
It is very interesting that the two gentlemen that you mentioned, both of them, in fact, hail from the northern part of Nigeria. One of them, of course, is a former senior military officer, and indeed even in fact a former military head of state in the 1980s, until of course he was toppled by then General Babangida, Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida, with his colleague General Sani Abacha at that time, even though ironically they are also the ones who had actually initially carried out a coup that helped Muhammadu Buhari become the military head of state at that time. But when he came up with this idea of fighting, corruption and all that kind of stuff, the other guys didn't really feel very comfortable about it. They decided to topple him. But this time he came through the democratic route. He was popularly elected about 5 years ago, and he is the president. He's once again, of course, fighting corruption. When you talk about corruption, by the way, Paul, the audience should be aware that when you talk about corruption in Nigeria, you're talking about malevolent corruption. It's not benign. It's malevolent. And frankly, you need to have a guy like Muhammadu Buhari in order to make sure that he can help put Nigeria really on track. Then you have Atiku Abubakar, a former vice president, and the government led by then President General Olusegun Obasanjo, retired but certainly not tired. But this is a man who has some very interesting, record, because I remember that he was at one time named by the U.S. FBI.
Absolutely. I covered that story.
You covered the story?
Yes. Yeah.
You know what happened to a congressman from New Orleans?
New Orleans.
From New Orleans.
Jefferson.
Jefferson.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, he was a trained lawyer to boot. In fact, he went to Harvard Law School. But guess what? Can you imagine that they found him actually keeping tens of thousands of dollars in a deep freeze, in a fridge. And when they interrogated him and what have you, apparently, according to, again, this report from the FBI, he had been working with a man by the name Atiku Abubakar, who happened to be vice president of Nigeria.
So he doesn't have a clean record, as you say?
Well, at least according to the FBI, he doesn't seem to have a clean record. And of course, you know what happened to Congressman Jefferson? Jefferson was obviously, he had been a congressman on Capitol Hill, a very powerful man. But you know what happened to him?
Yes. Yeah, let's talk about something else that keeps coming up. Every time we talk about Nigeria, or every time we do Shaka Extra Time, people want us to talk about Biafra. There is a comment here from Uche Biafra Nwachiniki. With due respect, Shaka, do you hate the people of Biafra? What do you think? What can you talk about Biafra's problem on your program?
Which, on the contrary, I have absolutely no reason why I would hate Biafrans. The only problem I think I have with Biafra is that the last time I checked, that was a political expression given to an area that was the southeastern part of Nigeria when, there was a second military coup back in 1966. A coup led, I believe, by then a Captain Murutara Muhammad and Captain Danjuma. They were able to overthrow the government of Ilonsi. Now, Major General Ilonsi was an Igbo, and earlier he had actually come to power through a coup that was largely led by Igbo army officers, most of them in fact majors. And here I remember, of course, one of the majors that I admired so much. He was like my hero, really, Chukuma Kaduna Nziogu, who was a major. He had been Sandhurst trained and all that kind of stuff. And again, this coup was actually brought about because of corruption at that time. And so what happened was the fact that in the first coup itself, the senior military officers who happened to come from the north had been killed, eliminated. And then the people who were running the show and what have you were basically mostly Igbos. They were majors. In fact, here I'm reminded even of a major, Emmanuel Ifia Juna, who had been a university graduate from, Ibadan, University College, and had actually been also a Commonwealth high jump champion in the 1950s. But this man was a major, and he was supposed to be leading the coup operations in Lagos, but apparently didn't quite succeed. And the man that I told you was my hero, Chukuma Kaduna Nziogu, was based in the north. He did his part and what have you, and that is how Major General Ironsi eventually became the first military head of state after toppling the government of, there was a prime minister who was an incredible, orator, an incredible orator at that time, Satafawa Balewa. Now, I also remember that when I first came here, in 1976, by the way, my first roommate was Maseras Osuji. Not only was Osuji an Igbo man, but Maseras, at least by his confession, had actually been a gallant soldier in the Biafran army.
Interesting.
And because of the fact that the federal Nigerian government fought against Biafra, which had been led by a man who had actually later became a friend of mine, and I covered him so much. We used to talk very occasionally. Dim Odumegu Ojukwu. He had actually been a lieutenant colonel in the Nigerian army, along with people like now General Gowon. They had been lieutenant colonels together and what have you. But because of the second coup, they found themselves on two sides of the aisle. The Igbos were executed in the northern part of Nigeria, those who were living there and what have you, and they ran to the eastern part, the southeastern part of Nigeria, which eventually they declared to be an independent republic of Biafra. There was also another man who came from there who I respected so much and who really inspired me, at least intellectually. You're talking about a man called Dr. Nandi Azikiwe. He was called Zeke of Africa. He was one of the earliest Africans, arguably, to gain a PhD from the United States. And I had always admired those people from that side and what have you. And I had sympathized, and I continue to sympathize and empathize with the people who come from that political expression that was known as Biafra. But when we think about Biafra now, I honestly think this is an issue that should be resolved by the federal government of Nigeria, or at least the African Union should come into play, or, and figure out how to deal with these, because I think the issue really is not the geographical expression or the geographical location where most of the Igbo community live, but I think it is the issue of lack of adequate social, economic, political justice. And in my work, I have tried very, very much to be an advocate of social, economic, political justice for all of us. And I think that Nigeria has a great opportunity, especially given that they are going to elections in February next year. And I remember that at one time, I actually had a show. We were talking about Nigeria. And one of the guests was a guy called Atiku Abubakar, who was then the vice president. I remember some Igbo in the audience asked him about why are Igbo being discriminated against. 30 years later, at that time, not a single Igbo had actually been promoted to the rank of general. You cannot believe the impact of that particular edition of Straight Talk Africa. 2 weeks later, the government promoted about 3 or 4 Igbos in the armed forces to the ranks of brigadier, major general, and what have you. So I hope that if this man can actually become president, Atiku Abubakar can find it in his heart to make sure that he reaches out to all Nigerians, including people who say they come from Biafra. But when it comes to what can I say and what can I do about Biafra, I have to say, Uche, that is above my pay grade.
Interesting. Let's go to some comments. Let's start in Germany. Let's start with Nambulilwa Muna Amna. She says, our generation is suffering from the cancer of corruption. Your thoughts?
I think she's right on the money. But I should also urge her, for example, to seize the moment, because I think this moment belongs to her generation. And as I have often said that when you think about it, all of life really is about passion, is about action and reaction. And to ignore the passion, the action and reaction of your generation is to risk having not really lived at all, occupying space. I would hope that this lady in Germany can actually seize this moment with her colleagues and her generation and make sure that they do the right thing. They fight, defeat corruption, and make sure that they restore the dignity of Africa. It is up to you. This is your generation, and this is your moment.
Let's go to another comment. Let's go to Ethiopia. The Ethiopian Prime Minister is coming up with all sorts of reforms. As we speak today, he held meetings with opposition leaders to discuss reforms and building institutions. When it comes to electoral, I think they're referring to electoral reforms. Your thoughts on that?
I think that, again, we've been talking about Ethiopia and some of the great things that seem to be happening there. I think that it is wonderful, to be very honest with you, to know that when you look at the African continent, there are some bright spots. And it seems to me, as I said before, Abiy Ahmed may very well be a legitimate new breed of African leaders. After all, he is, the last time I checked, about 41, correct? He is a very young man. And I think that when you look at the average generation of most African leaders, you're talking about 60, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so it seems
60,
to me,
between 65 and 70.
Precisely. So it seems to me that Abiy Ahmed may very well be, the beacon of hope for a new African leadership.
So you are talking about our generation. I could potentially become the next...
You have to wake up. This is your moment. You have to seize it. Mind you, you can't simply sit there and wait for political manna from heaven, because it's not going to happen. You're going to have to look for it. You're going to have to do it, demand it. And you have the mathematics, by the way. You have the numbers, because when you think about who constitutes the majority on the continent as we talk, you are probably talking about under 35. They're in control, really, in terms of the mathematics. So the question is how to mobilize, organize, and make sure that you do the right thing for the vast majority of the African people.
Shaka, we might have the numbers, but we don't have the tools. What does it take for us to get those tools, maybe to be in charge?
First of all, you see, you have to be able to know what you want. And once you are able to address that issue, then you look for the appropriate tools. So I don't think that is an issue, really. Because let's face it, all of life, again, is passion, action, and reaction. And you can't really ignore the passion, action, and reaction that is happening on your watch. This is your moment. You are more exposed than those generations that came before you. You have, luckily, social media, which not only exposes you in your neighborhood, in your region, But even beyond, you know what is happening, and you basically, you are more literate. You're more exposed, more literate. You have the mathematics on your side. You cannot afford to occupy space anymore. You have had an opportunity, a great honor to inherit a continent that is incredibly wealthy. The only problem is it lacks the type of leadership that it desires. I know that
Shaka, let's go to another comment. Yeah.
I know that no society gets a leadership that it desires, but rather it gets what it deserves. But I think you guys, you really have to learn from the mistakes of those generations that came before you.
You guys don't give us the breathing space, but let's go to another comment quickly. We are almost running out of time. Ugandans continue to mourn at the death of innocent Ugandans who died in a tragic boat accident. A lot of Ugandans are commenting here. They want your comments and thoughts on what happened.
I think what happened obviously is tragic. It's most unfortunate. And I think that's part of the reason it happened is obviously because there is somebody is not in charge of the store. If somebody was in charge of the store, they would have made sure that those types of boats, for example, they are the type of boats that really are fit for doing the work that they were supposed to do. I gather that these are boats that may in fact have not been even licensed. And if they are not licensed, who knows when there was the last time that they were serviced and all that kind of stuff. And so I think it is the issue of somebody actually either being or being absent of being in charge of the store. That's really the issue.
Yeah. What are you talking about tomorrow on Straight Talk Africa?
Tomorrow we are going to be talking about the long-awaited elections in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Are they going to be, in fact, democratic elections? Are they, in fact, going to be free, fair, credible, and transparent? Or are they going to be simply what someone would call selections?
Let's go to, we have time for one quick comment. Let's go to Julius. He says, passion, action, and reaction are applied in a democratic government that believe in truth and justice. Would you agree?
Yes, I would agree. But then again, what about you? Whoever you were, whoever you are, you should be able to be somebody that is capable of fighting for your freedom. You should not accept to be a hostage in an environment that you should, in fact, be able to occupy. Democracy is not something that just falls into, on the ground from heaven. It's not manna. You can't expect democracy simply to fall on the ground like manna from heaven. That one you are going to have to demand. And you're going to demand using your constitution. You're going to have civil disobedience. You're going to protest. You're going to debate until you arrive at a time where you have a society that reflects social, economic, political justice for all.
Unfortunately, we have run out of time. I want to thank you again for watching this edition. I'll be off for some time, the whole of December, so I'll see you probably in January. But in the meantime, Shaka will be here talking to you every Tuesday. Thank you so much, Shaka.
You're most welcome.
Yeah.